On the 25th of February 2298, the USS Potemkin arrives in the Barada system as part of a routine resupply. All appears normal, yet as the ship enters orbit over Baradas 3, her sensors begin to show strange readings. What appears to be a plasma field in orbit above the planet. Captain Chekhov begins to scrutinize this strange anomaly, deducing that this is no normal phenomena. As the Potemkin closes on the plasma field, it suddenly changes course, breaking orbit away from the Potemkin. Captain Chekhov is quick to act, locking on to the phenomena with a tractor beam. What Captain Chekhov discovered that day was to be the first step on the road to war. While the signing of the first Khitomer Accords is remembered today as an unprecedented step towards peace in the quadrant, at the time it appeared to be the opposite, as the Klingon Empire remained unstable throughout the 2290s. Weapons and warships frequently appeared on the black market, seeing use by pirates and extremists alike, and so despite the demilitarization of the Klingon Empire and the dissolving of the neutral zone, Federation presence on the Klingon border increased. This inevitably led to encounters between Federation and Romulan ships as they policed their own borders. However, it soon became clear that the two powers had very different approaches. Starfleet was extremely proactive and persistent in persecuting smugglers and pirates who tried to run the border, whilst the Romulans adopted a more hands-off approach. This came to a head in 2297, when Starfleet was pursuing a group of fugitives only for them to cross into Romulan space. The USS Dauntless attempted to follow, but was confronted by a Romulan Nova-class battleship. When Captain Ballard refused to turn back, the IRS Malevolent Watcher opened fire and destroyed the Dauntless, killing her 450 officers and crew. Yet, as the Dauntless had violated Romulan space, there was little Starfleet could do. The Romulans were well within their rights to fire, but it was clear that the Romulans were actively providing safe haven to various criminals and renegades in order to continually destabilize the Klingon Empire.
The Federation acted as if this kind of activity on our Klingon border was unusual. On the contrary, it was very much routine. Unlike the Federation, we enjoyed a relatively soft border with the Klingons. We had learned a long time ago that it was better to leave it be. If we patrolled our side, then they'd patrol theirs. That's how accidents happen.
But activity along their borders with the volatile Klingon Empire was not the sole source of tension between Earth and Romulus. During the 2270s and 80s, Starfleet had undergone a significant build-up in anticipation of a hot war with the Klingon Empire. At the same time, the Romulan Imperial Navy underwent a rapid fleet modernization program, allowing them to match Starfleet technologically, although remaining outnumbered. The result of this disparity was that the Romulan Imperial fleet adopted a policy of strategic deterrence as the only way to keep a numerically superior Starfleet at bay. This policy came into full force in 2294 as it became clear that Starfleet would no longer be solely focused on the Klingon Empire. But strategic deterrence would only be effective if Starfleet was assured of their capabilities. In 2295, the Romulans began conducting weapons tests along the neutral zone, demonstrating to Starfleet the power of their plasma torpedoes when used on a planetary body. The Imperial Navy would also conduct increasingly audacious forays into Federation space, showcasing their achievements by publishing scientific data on various star systems in Federation space, data which could only be gained by a ship in the system. Yet it would not be long before Starfleet, tired of these humiliations, responded with a class of ship to beat the Romulans at their own game. The Excelsior Type 2 was built for one purpose, and one purpose alone: to mount a Federation cloaking device, allowing it to carry its payload of 12 tricobalt warheads deep into enemy territory. By 2300, 4 such vessels were in service, among them the USS Ohio.
Well, before taking command of the Ohio, I spent 7 years commanding the Talus, an old Andor Mark I. 7 years of sitting on the Klingon neutral zone, just waiting. Just waiting for them to come right at us. Commanding the Ohio, however, well, that was quite a change. I couldn't wait to wipe the smug smiles off the faces of those pointy-eared bastards.
In 2298, Starfleet demonstrated their own capability to infiltrate Romulan space as the Federation Archaeological Association published images and analysis of ancient ruins on the Romulan world of Asti 5. Images which it has since been confirmed were taken by the USS Ohio. At the same time, Starfleet conducted numerous weapons tests near the neutral zone, including frequent tests of tricobalt warheads on large planetoids. And so, by 2302, a delicate balance of terror had been achieved between the Federation and Romulan Empire. Each were capable of infiltrating the other's space, and both were capable of inflicting significant damage upon the other. Yet this balance was constantly in flux, as both sides sought to track down and counter the enemy infiltrators. Operating in parallel to the Excelsior IIs was the Neutral Zone Task Force, comprised of largely scientific vessels such as the Soyuz subclass, variations of the Oberth platform, and the Columbia-class frigate, equipped with cloaking devices. These ships were tasked with hunting down Romulan infiltrators and either turning them back, or if necessary, to call in an Excelsior to engage them. At the same time, the Romulans also had their own ships patrolling for Federation infiltrators. While such units largely existed for defensive purposes, they arguably placed more lives in jeopardy, as they threatened to disrupt the balance of terror. If one side believed that they had the advantage over the other, it may embolden them to strike first, precipitating a war that would likely be more devastating than any war with the Klingons ever could be. When the USS Potemkin caught a Romulan bird of prey in orbit over Boradus III, a system with no military value, but a large civilian population, the implication was clear.
The destruction of the enemy's population has always been the purview of the Imperial Navy. In the early days of the Empire, it was often the only option open to us. But during the war with Earth, its limitations as a solely military tactic were made clear, but so was its potential as a psychological weapon. The enemy is unlikely to fight for his home and family if doing so places them in jeopardy.
Yet the greatest source of tension between Romulus and Earth was their outward expansion towards the galactic centre, exceeding the boundaries of the neutral zone as agreed after the war in the 22nd century. By 2305, the Federation had signed a treaty of alliance with the Capharians and Gazarites, which prefigured their eventual entry into the Federation. At the same time, the Federation established colonies in the Typhon sector, which lay between the two powers. Named for the Typhon Expanse, which resides between the Archer and Norcon systems, the Typhon sector itself is a relatively narrow area of space, as the other side is bordered by the Pulsar Nebula, running between Gaza Prime and Sentinel Minor. The abundance of celestial phenomena in this region render it extremely defensible, with only a handful of possible approach corridors to defend, and the interference from the two nebula mean that it is very easy to conceal a large fleet in close proximity to the enemy's vulnerable flank. Both the Romulans and the Federation were keenly aware of the advantage that the Typhon sector provided to whoever held it, and so both were quick to stake their claims, with the Federation establishing a colony on Typhon 5, while the Romulans established their own on Melnos 3. Throughout the 2300s, numerous colonies would be established in the Typhon sector, with both governments actively encouraging naive colonists who did not realize that they were merely pawns in a larger game. Despite the increasing proximity of the two powers and the increasingly frequent encounters between Federation and Romulan ships, an uneasy peace continued to hold.
Back when I was in Starfleet, I can remember serving on the USS Drake, an old Archer-class scout. And when you're crammed into one of those things with 20 to 30 other people, you find a way to get along. You have to. This was much the same, though I wouldn't call it peace. More, the absence of a reason.
However, in 2307, a reason presented itself, as the Federation established a colony in the Norcon system. Situated between the two nebula at the far end of the Typhon corridor, it would allow the Federation to completely close the Romulans out of the Typhon sector.
The discovery of the Norcon outpost forced our hand. We had to act quickly and decisively.
On March 3rd, 2307, an unmarked ship transported an elite Romulan strike team under then Sub-Lieutenant Jarok to the Norcon outpost, infiltrating the outpost and planting an antimatter bomb before silently evacuating aboard their ship. No one on the Norcon outpost suspected anything until suddenly, at 11 AM local time, the bomb went off, vaporizing the outpost and the 1,500 men, women and children who had called it home. It would not be until 2 weeks later that the USS Proxima would arrive at the outpost after it went dark. Jarok and his team had been careful not to leave any trace of their presence. Indeed, there was no evidence to suggest the explosion was anything other than an unfortunate accident. Yet even without evidence, everyone in the Federation knew that the Romulans were behind it, their meaning seemingly clear.
Cowards. That's what they thought of us. They thought we'd gone soft. But hell, we showed them otherwise.
Back off. That's what the Norcon attack was meant to say. We'll keep to ourselves if you keep to yourselves. Unfortunately, Starfleet did not see it that way.
Once again humiliated and outraged by the Norcon massacre, nearly all of Starfleet's top brass, including the famous Commodore Sulu, pushed for a response. With the election of a new president in 2308, Gan Lacan, they had the support they needed. Lacan authorized additional deployments along the Typhon sector and neutral zone. He also signed an executive order that made the construction of any cloak-equipped vessel a first priority. By 2310, 8 Excelsior IIs had been constructed, along with 16 Columbia-class patrol frigates. Viewing these escalations as nothing more than an attempt at intimidation, Praetor Hal Kai responded in kind, escalating her rhetoric towards the Federation, further increasing her own deployments along the Federation border, and even authorizing ships to openly enter the neutral zone in order to test Starfleet's responses. All the while, the invisible game of cat and mouse continued to play out inside the neutral zone. While it had become routine, and was regarded by the crews as little more than one long war game, the risks were very real. On November 3rd, 2309, the USS Thresher, an Akula-class frigate, intercepted a Romulan bird of prey in the vicinity of Calder 6. After getting a fix on the cloaked ship, Thresher sent out a deflector pulse.
I remember that sound, the dreaded deflector pulse. In some ways, it was almost a relief, like getting caught by your girlfriend's parents. You know it's gotta happen sometime. Now the game was up, and you could breathe again. Most of the time, they'd let you off with a mean look and a few stern words, but then again, you never were quite sure if you would break out the shotgun this time.
Despite receiving a deflector pulse, the bird of prey does not change course. Captain Hammond attempted to hail her, but received no response. He then ordered a warning shot to be fired. The cloaked ship then changed course. But for a brief moment, it appeared to be lining up for an attack run on the Thresher. Captain Hammond was quick to act, torpedoing the bird of prey, destroying her instantly. But what Captain Hammond had not realized was that a second bird of prey had been shadowing him. Having witnessed their comrades murdered in cold blood, the bird of prey decloaked and fired a plasma torpedo, crippling the Thresher, killing 63 of her crew, before returning to Romulan space. While this time the situation did not escalate any further, with both sides agreeing it to be an unfortunate accident, by 2310, astropolitical tensions were higher than they had been during the Genesis crisis. The Quadrant simply held its breath. All it would take was one fateful mistake, one misjudgment, to spark Armageddon. In 2311, tensions reached their breaking point when the IRS Defender of Charon discovered a Federation starbase under construction in the Tomed system, located on the far side of the Typhon sector. Adjacent to Romulan space in the Pharos sector, the Tomed system is extremely remote, taking 40 days to reach from Federation space. The Federation could only build a base there for one specific purpose: to strike at Romulus, the heart of the Empire itself.
Tomed was our trump card. We could bypass the Bassin Rift and hit the green-blooded bastards where it hurt. Unlike Norcon, this time they wouldn't be able to pull any of that Black Ops bullshit.
While the starbase itself was still under construction, defences and fortifications had already been installed, including an early warning system, a sensor grid, orbital phaser turrets, and a localized shield above the starbase itself. While these would not stop a determined Romulan assault, it made it impossible for the Romulans to destroy the base covertly. If the Romulans attacked, the Federation would have enough evidence to prove the Romulans' guilt.
The base at Tomed posed an unacceptable risk to the security of the Empire. The Federation knew that when they built it, they knew that we would have to act.
At a meeting with Imperial High Command, Praetor Hal Kai is given two options.
All-out assault. It would be quick. We'd suffer relatively few casualties, but we would be seen as the aggressor. We'd be doing exactly what the Federation wanted. The quarantine was the only real option. It forced the Federation to take the initiative.
On the 6th of July, 2311, 22 ships of the 3rd Imperial Strike Wing arrived cloaked above Tomed 4. The flagship, IRS Choir of Abraxas, decloaked, transmitting a message that stated that they were implementing a quarantine on the base. Any ship bearing fuel or munitions that could be employed for offensive purposes would be turned back. While the system was guarded by 2 Constitution-class cruisers and a squadron of Jester and Greer-type corvettes, there was little they could do against an entire Romulan strike fleet, and so they stood down, maintaining orbit over the starbase. Their fates now in the hands of Starfleet Command, over 100 light-years away. Starfleet Command on Earth received the Romulans' message on the 6th of July, but it would be 10 hours later that they would receive confirmation, receiving a distress signal directly from the Tomed base. At 1200, President Lacan immediately convened the Joint Chiefs of Staff for an emergency meeting and ordered an emergency session of the Federation Council to be held the next day.
We couldn't back down. Not after coming this far. When I signed off on the Tomed plan, I knew this might happen. And we were ready. We were all convinced the Romulans were bluffing. They wanted a confrontation, and we'd give them one.
The next day, President Lacan presented his resolution to the Federation Council. It passed unanimously. By this time, anti-Romulan sentiment had reached a fever pitch.
It's hard for the younger generation to understand just how scared we were. A lot of our grandparents remembered the First War, told us stories, and a lot of holo films had been made since. So it was already very prominent in the public consciousness, and all the saber rattling and demonstrations made it worse. You walked around every day, doubting if you'd see the next, never knowing if they were overhead, waiting to push the button.
Public support for President Lacan is overwhelming as a task force of 28 starships gathers at Corridan, led by Commodore Sulu maintaining his flag aboard the Excelsior, who is in turn joined by her sisters Proxima, Galacta, Kitty Hawk, Ajax and Royal Oak. Their orders are to clear the Romulans from the Tomed system, by force if necessary. The task force departed from Corridan on July 20th, 2311. The voyage to Tomed would take 40 days. The doomsday clock was now set. The two governments had 40 days to avert Armageddon.